I am so conservative.
Rationalize in my head. These are things I read in the
I'm going to talk about Willow Creek.
Okay.
Willow Creek, a few years back, had
remembered at the time when Will Rogers said, I don't belong to any organized religion. I'm a Baptist.
Yeah. I am so conservative. If you didn't jump to conclusions, you might not get any exercise. I am so conservative. Welcome to the Unknown Webcast. For some, this is old hat, but for anyone new, they should probably be warned that I am so conservative that I can't turn left even when I'm driving. This is a trigger warning for those who are new to the webcast. They should be aware of this. It's not a safe space for those who may be easily offended by having their ideas challenged or even perhaps by our satire. Today is January 14, 2020, and this is broadcast number 173. We are glad to have our associate, Carl Teichrib, who we love to abuse periodically as we have an opportunity, who is the author of The Game of Gods, and he's going to join us to talk about politics and religion in the age of enchantment. My name is Don Vino. I'm president of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. in Wonder Lake, Illinois, which produces the Unknown Webcast. And our senior researcher is Ron Hensel, who will introduce the sponsors of today's webcast, and here is Ronnie.
Yeah, good morning, good afternoon, good day. We have a Canadian here. Greetings from sunny Florida, where the palm trees came out, saw their shadows, and now we have 12 more months of summer. Our sponsor for this episode of the Unknown Webcast is the Grievance, well, we have two, the Grievance Industrial Complex, because things are never bad enough already, and the Coexist Boutique for when you care enough to take your hands off your loved one's throats long enough to pick out the perfect gift. And if you enjoy our broadcast, or if it really annoys you, oh, wait a minute, I got a problem here. The next slide doesn't belong there. What happened? Let's see if I can move. Okay. To ensure your continued access to this program, please go to midwestoutreach.org, click the yellow donate button, and contribute as you feel led. And please don't forget to subscribe to us on YouTube. So I'm going to turn Carl's mic back on. We didn't trust him to talk or anything until now, but now. So speaking of abuse, Carl, welcome to our
Unknown Webcast.
Now you know why it's unknown. So,
well, hey, if I walk away from here with with more than my ego bruised, that's okay, I
guess. Carl, Ron, I love Carl. We infrequently frequent the Parliament of World Religions. I say infrequently because they only have them every 3 to 5 years. But they are an incredible opportunity for.
Does that mean you infrequent them?
Yes, we infrequent them. That's exactly
what we infrequent them. Okay, yeah. I'm sorry to interrupt, but go ahead.
In fact, that's where Carl and I kind of ran into each other the first time, was at a Parliament of World Religions. Yeah, it didn't hurt us any. we did hurt the feelings of others who were around us, however.
I don't doubt that at all. Yeah.
Well, it's an amazing opportunity, and in my opinion, Christians who believe in missions to those who are other than Christian. I know that there are some who believe in missions, but only to other Christians, which is disconcerting to me.
Yeah, Christians that don't read the King James Version, you mean? Is that what you're talking about?
Or anything like that.
Yeah.
But Carl is a researcher who has spent 25 years now or something like that.
Yeah, probably more. It's a long time already.
Working on all of these issues, and he came out with his book, The Game of Gods, which let me bring this up here so we could show everyone what this actually looks like. I'm going to do a little screen share here, see how much time I can waste in the process. There we go. Game of Gods. How do you like that? And you can actually go to our Facebook page, Midwest Christian Outreach Inc. Facebook page, push on the shop button, and you can buy it from there. You can go on our website, or you can go to his website, gameofgods.ca, and get a copy of it. Game of Gods, the Temple of Man in the Age of Enchantment. So we have a statement we're going to read from here before before we let him go too far. Interfaithism is more than religious solidarity in light of social change. It is politics wrapped in a veneer of spirituality. Our topic today is politics and religion in the age of enchantment, or when really bad politics marries really bad religion. What does that mean?
Yep. Yes. Well, first of all, we have to kind of define what enchantment or re-enchantment is. And I'm making the argument in the book that we still have postmodernism. We still have the effects of modernity. We still have the influence to some extent of the Judeo-Christian worldview, but we see our culture changing all around us. I make the argument that we have entered the age of re-enchantment. Postmodernism, by its nature, allows questions to be asked, but doesn't encourage the finding of solid answers. There are no answers. There are no definable truths, nothing we can hang our coat on, so to speak. Re-enchantment is a product of postmodernism, but it says we can hang our coat on something. We now have something to work with. And in this case, it's our allegiance to the earth. It's our allegiance to the planet. We become one world, one people. In the interfaith community, we have one voice as we now work together as religious leaders to denounce the devastation against Mother Earth, and to denounce climate change, and to denounce. And we are for, in the interfaith movement, we're for more government and more programs and more taxes, less capitalism, more socialism. And so interfaithism and politics merge together in a progressive politics with liberal theology in service to the earth. And that really, bottom line, becomes the expression and the practical outpouring of re-enchantment.
So let's go back over that a second, if you don't mind. You said
sure.
Postmodernism doesn't encourage you to have certainty about anything. And my understanding is the reason, as soon as you have certainty about something, you've privileged one side of an argument. And as soon as you privilege one side of an argument, you create a binary opposite the underprivileged option, I guess. And so that immediately kicks in the automatic reflex of every postmodernist, which is to deconstruct that binary opposition and to flip, to invert the what do you call it, the privilege arrangement. So it just becomes it's kind of like you're forever turning over the hourglass, and the hourglass only has 2 grains of sand in it, It's like boop boop, okay, boop, boop, flip, okay. So now you come to re-enchantment, and haven't they then really utterly contradicted the basic premise, at least of deconstruction, within postmodernism when they privilege re-enchantment?
Absolutely.
I mean, I'm pretty disenchanted with this here.
Well, obviously you have a worldview bias.
Well, I'm privileging my disenchantment because you re-enchanted, and that privileged re-enchantment. So I feel it necessary to deconstruct that.
Is your binary binding and
let's not talk about binding, Don. I'm taking all of the Metamucil I can right now. So. Okay.
But it's interesting, because if you go back into the theory and the philosophy of Max Weber, where already couple of generations ago, he was talking about how science and industry had destroyed any sense of wonder, any sense of enchantment. How we have we have entered an era where the sense of grandeur has been lost, and he wasn't making an appeal to go back to a Christian foundation, but he was mourning the loss of some kind of a connection. And re-enchantment basically is, we're going to find our meaning, we're going to find our purpose, we're going to find our wonder in the oneness of all things. We're going to find our oneness in politics. We'll find our oneness and our purpose.
Right.
It becomes a grand narrative where we work for one world.
Well, it becomes a narrative. Well, okay, but how is that different from a kind of a corporate existentialism? You know, how is that any different? I mean, I'm still, Star Trek is trying to catch up to all this postmodernism still. Last I checked, you still had Worf on some planet with half Romulan, half Klingon people saying, we've got to make his life meaningful with this ritual. Well, which is a very existentialist thing to say, because meaning doesn't exist in itself. You have to make it. Meaning doesn't exist because God created everything. We have to give things meaning. So now postmodernism has basically sucked all of the meaning air out of the room, and now they realize they can't breathe. So now we've got to we got to put some oxygen in the room. Why don't we try re-enchantment?
Okay, so I have something I need to suggest before we get too far afield in this. Explain, Ron or Carl, what existentialism is for the average person. You and I all know what we're talking about. I can
explain for the below average person, but
okay, that'll be fine. Lowest common denominator, and then it works up from there.
You want me to take a stab at it, Carl? Then you can correct it.
Yeah, go ahead. Okay. Go ahead. Perfect.
Okay. All of philosophy up until existentialism taught that first we have essence, and essence is what gives everything meaning, including existence itself. Okay. And so what is the essence of what was created? Of course, we believed things were created. Well, once they stopped assuming a creator, now you had a problem with what good is this essence thing in terms of giving us meaning? And it wasn't doing a very good job. A lot of philosophers were not able to figure out what's the meaning of all these essences, right? So the existentialists came along and they made a statement that very few people understood unless they were philosophers. That is, existence precedes essence. That is, existence takes priority. In other words, if you're looking for meaning, don't look for it in the essence of what something is. Look for it in the existence. And really, in terms of the philosophy, that translated into mainly experience and what you decide. You create your own meaning. In existentialism, everything is absurd. So existentialists love Ecclesiastes, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. You could translate that meaningless, everything's meaningless, or you really could translate it absurd, everything's absurd, and it would sound just like Jean-Paul Sartre. It's all absurd. It's whatever, like the Saturday Night Live caricature they did of him. So since everything is in it, everything is. I don't think they would say essentially absurd, because they would say we really can't get to the essence of anything. They gave up on that project. But what we can say is we can make choices that take absurdity out and put meaning in. And so by your existence, by making decisive choices, that this is the meaning you're choosing. So now postmodernism then comes along later and says, who are you to create your own meaning? Because now you end up privileging whatever. Well, I don't know. I really don't know how postmodernism.
Existentialism is really just an argument about how we exist.
Well, it's an argument about meaning.
About meaning.
It's really
meaning of existence. The meaning of existence. Okay.
And when I said postmodernism sucked all the air out of the room, what I meant was they took away the idea of meaning. They took away the meaning is even necessary or desirable.
Well, which is why Burning Man, the Burning Man event, completely fits, Ron, what you just described, as they're searching for some meaning in the now.
Yeah.
even though they recognize that meaning has essentially been stripped away, and yet they're grasping for a meaning. They're hoping for meaning, and nobody can tell you what it really means, what the event really means, or
Oh,
what the
because
man's symbol
that would be
means.
privileging your meaning over other people's meanings, right?
Right. And so you
Yeah.
experience it. That's the only way that you can grab hold of it, is by experiencing it. And now here you are, you're face to face, and the reality and the meaning and the purpose comes in the fact that you're experiencing it
Don't
at this moment.
yeah, don't tell people what things mean, because that would be mean.
That's right.
Yeah, don't want to be mean. Okay.
No, we want to be nice Canadians, right? Hey,
Eh?
Yeah, I don't
but
have to worry about that kind of guilt, because I am a narrow-minded bigot just by nature. So.
That's
but
right.
bringing all of this now around to something, let's say, boots on the ground. Uh, the world is looking for some meaning. The world is looking for some purpose. There has to be, and I make the argument in chapter 7 of my book, there is now this grand myth-making desire or a yearning that we can somehow find a new story, a new framing model that we can create reality through. And so in the late 1960s, early 1970s, that ended up becoming the Earth. That ended up becoming our mother, a return to Gaia, a repackaging of the old pagan myth for a technologically advanced society. And everything then becomes politicized around that. Interfaithism kind of builds its unity around what we can do in service to the earth. And I mean, Don, I don't know if you were at the last session of the 2018 Parliament, where the executive director for the Parliament got up and he said what we were now doing is working to save the earth. And the word he used repeatedly was salvation. We're engaged in an act of salvation. And by saving the earth, we engage in salvation for ourselves. And that became, he hit that home over and over again in his closing statements. You couldn't help but walk away going, you're actually, what's really going on is an alternative salvation message. And
Well,
it's grounded
it
in
is.
the earth.
In fact, the last two parliaments, that kind of was the central theme through nearly everything they did in the parliament. Not this last one, but the previous one, they had Al Gore's daughter there doing the whole, the planet's going to be destructed in 15 minutes or something like that.
Right.
If we don't make radical changes. And they had repentance sessions to repent before Mother Earth for all of that we've harmed Mom in the process, and those sorts of things.
Those were great. I love those when they apologize to plants and rocks and things. I get a kick out of that. So.
But just last week I was teaching a modular course at Miller College of the Bible. It's a small Bible college in Saskatchewan. I teach a 20-hour course on secular pagan trends. One of the things I did was I have the worship book for the world the Interfaith Environmental Sabbath that was put together for June the 5th of 1990. And in it, they have sermon suggestions, they have prayer suggestions, they even have nice songs that you could sing about your connection as one to the earth, all you religions coming together. And then one of the requirements, or not requirements, but recommendations, was that you need to invite a representative from another plant or animal species to come and bestow wisdom to the congregation.
My song would have been, we are one in the humus, we are one in the soil. And
I'd probably invite broccoli.
And we pray it will cool us before the world boils. Okay.
I have a squishy broccoli.
and they'll know we are global climate changers by our whatever. Okay.
So, gosh, this,
are we getting off track?
I think I should feel bad about this. I don't, because we're kind of laughing about this, but there are people who really take this quite seriously.
Well, not only do they take it seriously, Don, political policy gets built on this stuff.
Well, and that's the point of what we're talking about today. So how does that all work together?
Well, here's what people sometimes don't realize. Things like the Parliament of World Religions develops what's called soft law, which is, here's a bunch of recommendations, policy concepts. Look, the world religions are all coming together. They're all saying that we need to combat climate change. We need to institute maybe a global carbon tax or some type of national carbon tax. And here's the religious leaders have put these policy recommendations on the table. And it ends up bringing legitimacy then for politicians to say there is a broad group of stakeholders who are now supporting our green initiative, whatever the situation may be, and then policies end up coming out of the wash because of it. A good example is the G8 and the G20 World Religion Summits and the Interfaith Forum. The G8 World Religion Summits took place from, I believe, 2007, something to that effect, up to 2012. And then it changed into the G8 Interfaith Forum. And so what would happen, and I was at the 2010 one, by the way, what you had happening was religious leaders from around the world would gather together during the G8 World Political Summit. They would work through policies. I remember at the G8 World Religion Summit I was at, they talk a lot about creating new green policies, new economic models. The representative from the Salvation Army talked about how we can't each have our own bicycle, but now we can have a bicycle that we can share in community. Stuff like this. It was basically the green gospel wrapped up in socialism and the politics of internationalism. And then those concepts were put in a position paper, a list of policy recommendations, and were then given to the heads of state who were attending the G8 conference at that time in Toronto. And each year this repeats itself. So that's just one example of how interfaithism and the idea of international governance ends up dovetailing with each other. There's actually a lot of examples of this. In fact, in a couple of weeks from now, the very first week of February is the World Interfaith Harmony Week, which is a United Nations program. And so there are scores of interfaith events that will be taking shape leading up to the World Interfaith Harmony Week, and then during the Interfaith Harmony Week, as religions are all coming together to basically say, yes, we're all working with the United Nations to make a better world. In fact, let me just scroll through here on my other computer because I have a page open. On Thursday, like this Thursday, January the 16th, at the United Nations Church Center across the street from the United Nations is an interfaith festival as a bunch of religious leaders, political leaders, and social change agents are all coming together to say, hey, the religions of the world are all working with the United Nations and with non-governmental organizations to combat climate change and to make the world into one.
Yes, and they keep it, I get all of their emails also, and the problem is I can't harmonize on Harmony Week, so it's a little difficult for me.
What really amazes me is that people who understand our Constitution as well as the constitutions of other nations can actually say something like global fill in the blank tax with a straight face. I mean, who is the taxing body? And as soon as you create a taxing body that can enforce tax collection on a global basis, you've created a one world government.
Ron, I have been in a number. I mean, I probably would have to sit down and count how many different international events, political events, interfaith events, where the discussion has arisen about the necessity of putting a global taxation regime in place. With very straight faces. Straight faces.
I'm not going to say I'm going to participate in something like this, but I'm telling you, the minute you do that, blood will run in the streets. And I'm not talking figuratively here. I'm talking literally.
It's interesting.
You will have an armed uprising revolt on your hands.
Because some of the ideas have come from academics out of your country. I mean, the Tobin tax is a prime example.
Oh, sure.
The Tobin tax, the idea that what we can do is instead of having a single tax for the world, we will tax international monetary exchanges. And as soon as we do that, we can put that money into the coffers of the United Nations.
Right.
That was so serious that the EU, my country, and a few others already signed up and said, yeah, this is like late 1990s, saying we're going to go with it. And that, it didn't happen, but there was a lot of steam behind that idea.
When you think of what would have to happen in order for that to happen, I think the shooting would start even before it got a chance to happen.
I would I would disagree with you with your premise, and here's why.
Okay.
You are assuming that most people are actually aware. I would suggest they
Right.
are not.
No, I'm assuming that some people are aware, and
Yes,
those are
but
the people who are going to start shooting.
yeah, but not enough. I mean, for
Well,
example, we're watching right now in Virginia as they're trying to pass legislation that will ultimately end up in saying, okay, everyone bring your guns in because we're done. Our gun control is that you're not going to have them. Uh, Now that's going to meet with a fight, but how did they get to elect a House and a Senate and a governor that are united on that issue? Because people weren't paying attention. How many
Right.
people know what kind of taxes they're actually paying? How often do you look at your receipt when you leave the grocery store and say, "Oh, I have 46 taxes on there"? You don't, because mostly are hidden. Uh,
yeah, but
in
every single one of those taxes. Well, okay, and you could even argue that a global tax could be voted in at the local level. You could argue that, but every
Probably not. It'll be a national level.
well, okay, relatively local. I mean, to us, I mean, on a global basis, the United States is as local as you can get, right? I mean,
Yeah, right.
so each nation would have to go for it, but the moment you cross the threshold, when you create the taxing body, and you give that and you empower that taxing body to haul people into court, an international body that is going to prosecute Americans or Canadians or Europeans. Okay, I mean, Great Britain, I mean, that was essentially the problem that led to Brexit. And
Right.
so you have, so I just see, I don't see that people's attitudes against a one world government ceding our sovereignty to even a super state, as Margaret Thatcher called it. Uh,
Right. Right.
yeah, it's going to go over very well.
Well, and it won't. It would require, and this is something that's said now. I realize we're a little bit off topic, but at the same time, it does fit. When I've been to World Federalist meetings, and the last big one I was at was 2012, so it's been a while ago. Uh, but the idea came up over and over again. The only way that this is going to happen is if we have a global crisis, and this is not a
Right,
crisis
right.
of, this is not an economic crisis. This is not like a regional war. This has to be World War II magnitude plus plus plus. The recognition that World War I brought about the League of Nations, World War II brought about the United Nations. We need something of equal or greater magnitude so that we could actually say, hey, a world problem requires a world solution.
Well, and that's why.
I'm glad you went there, because what we're saying is we all really have to get along at some point. And how do we coexist?
Very difficult. It's very
It
difficult.
is difficult, and we have a sponsor that
Hey,
speaks to that.
yeah,
issue.
because we even have trouble just with our neighbors. For example, do you struggle with finding the right wine sacrifice, wine to bring to pagan goat sacrifices? I can't even say it. It's just so difficult. It's a struggle. Uh, do you wonder what to wear to your neighbor's neo-Nazi parties? Do you get anxiety attacks when trying to find the right picket sign to share with your friends from Westboro Baptist Church? Well, now you can put an end to all the worries that come from trying to fit in with people on opposing sides of the culture wars, because you can find the perfect gift for any ideology at the Coexist Boutique. You know what? They got a special deal going on, Don. Did you know that? This week,
I assumed that was true.
yeah, this week's special deal in honor of the 50th anniversary of Mao Zedong's Cultural Revolution, which was actually a few years ago. You can relive the days when university students subjected their professors to public shaming sessions. They actually had a name for these public shaming sessions. They called them, and I forget what they called them now, so I'll keep talking. Uh, uh, I had it on the tip of my tongue, in which they would break their eyeglasses. This actually happened, and publicly rebuke them at great length for not exhibiting politically correct opinions and behaviors. Oh wait, that's going on right now in the USA. Okay, well, anyways, this week's special deal: Cultural Revolution eyewear. See, we got something out of that. We got genuine smashed Chinese prescription lenses and frames. We've been holding these things in warehouses for over 50 years now because we knew one day you would want them. Formerly owned by PhDs and university administrators dating back to 1966 to 1976, the very years of the Cultural Revolution. Only 99 cents a pair at the Coexist Boutique for when you care enough to take your hands off your loved ones' throats long enough to pick out the perfect gift. There's no better place to do that. So
There you go. There you go, Carl.
there you go.
Well, hey, to the first commercial that you had about what wine should you bring to a goat sacrifice,
Pagan
I was
goat,
at a
yeah.
Which one?
yes, I think it's probably a Malbec or Merlot. It's definitely a deep red, because I was at a this is gonna sound crazy, but yeah, you guys know me. I was at a pagan conference
Actually, I thought
last
I knew you,
March.
but-
Yeah, I was at a pagan conference last March where I went to a workshop on animal sacrifices, and they did a libation ritual and poured a deep red wine out to the gods. So I think it's a red.
How many goats did they have to kill for that, or did they kill goats? I don't know.
Thankfully, there were no animals hurt in the making of that conference workshop.
Okay. Wow. So, well, picking out the right gifts. It seems that 1984 was right about everything but the date. Unless you were living in the Soviet Union at the time, or China for that matter. Well, actually, Mao was dead for 8 years by 84. They were was it the Gang of Four or Five? Well, they had a gang of something in China. They were trying to scapegoat these people with all of the things that went wrong during the Cultural Revolution, which was basically everything, included Mao's wife, Madame Mao. We heard a lot. She was constantly being charged with one thing or another. Oh, I remember what they called them now. They called them struggle sessions, where you had to do what they called self-criticism, in which you basically it was confessing how you violated party ideology and all that. So it happens on Twitter all the time right now. So
I was just gonna say, isn't that what just happened to Donald Trump with the whole impeachment process?
no, he doesn't cooperate. But
That's true. That's true.
like during if somebody accidentally says something that, unless their name is Ricky Gervais, if they say something that's politically incorrect, or criticize people or whatever, then they get called out, and then they have to go through this long public humiliation on Twitter. I'm sorry that I forgot to use your pronouns, or I'm sorry that I didn't know that. Well, I can't think of a good example right now, but there's some excellent examples out there. I'm sorry when I said that that guy really wasn't attacked by MAGA hat wearing people in Chicago, even though he really wasn't. But I shouldn't have said he wasn't, because that offended people. So.
Well, with all the stories I just heard you say, Ron, I almost think you're Canadian.
Jussie Smollett, that was his name. Almost, I am almost Canadian. I was born in Chicago. So you're almost Canadian.
Okay. Yes. Oh yeah, getting back a little bit to the Interfaith Harmony Week that's going to be coming up. What's kind of interesting with the history of that was that came directly out of the Common Word Initiative, where Muslims and Christian leaders got together and said that we need to be able to work together on social issues. And from there, it ended up becoming part of the United Nations program, and the United Nations adopted it as a resolution called the World Interfaith Harmony Week.
Did these social issues include little girls going to school and getting an education?
Well,
oh, okay.
But I mean, it was, the Common Word was a big deal back in 2007. You had all these Muslim clerics, and then different Christian clerics, or not clerics, but you might as well say they were different pastors, different seminary leaders, talking about how, hey, we really are basically worshiping the same God, and Christians and Muslims need to come together. Well, it was because of that you ended up having this this broader movement at the United Nations saying, yeah, we need to all come together and work together as one. Don't we all all religions share some responsibility now in making the world a better place, because hey, after all, wars and suffering and strife is caused by religions, don't you know?
Whenever I hear people saying we need to come together, I just put on the Abbey Road album and start from the first song. Yeah, here come old flat top, he come grooving up slowly. Well, anyway, go ahead.
But what is interesting is they do come together. They do come together, and then they do set agendas, and they do have policy concepts, and they wrestle through stuff, and then they send Karina Gore off to the Paris Climate Conference like they did in 2015 as being the ambassador on climate change for the World Parliament of Religions. And I keep telling people, look, it's not how many people are involved. When I returned from the 2015 Parliament, I had a conversation with somebody about what was happening in the interfaith world, and her response to me was, well, it's only 10,000 people. So what? Hey, these are 10,000 people who have a dedicated cause, and what they're doing is definitely spanning not just religion but also politics. And the international community looks at the interfaith movement as having, the voice of legitimacy. It gives the international political community some legitimacy in the area of liberal religions, liberal theology. It goes together.
I'm gonna make a social statement I'm gonna cross the Atlantic on a surfboard, because I want to show the benefits of global warming. We're going to do a lot more surfing. Well, anyways,
I like that. It's minus 27 here, Ron. I'm in Canada. I wouldn't mind some global warming.
I like
it comes every spring,
surfing
apparently.
myself, because I can't swim.
So
we have a little bit of warning every spring.
I can surf all the way to South Africa over the internet. It's kind of cool. I like it.
What I'd like to know is, how can we put some flesh on these bones here of re-enchantment?
Sure.
What is, okay, I think I got a little whiff of it when you talked about Burning Man, because that's, yeah. So totally unintentional pun. But anyways, I got a whiff of it there. Smoke gets in your eyes sometimes. And I've watched a lot of videos about Burning Man. I've read a lot of stuff about Burning Man. I first heard about Burning Man when a former EMNR president, who shall remain nameless, he became enchanted with it, you might say. What was his name again? Well, anyways, he shall remain nameless until I recall what.
You mean John?
Moorhead, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. We don't want. That would be bad if we made people remain nameless. John Moorhead was when nobody else that I knew was talking about Burning Man, because no one had ever heard of it. He was writing about it, and he was apparently fascinated with it. And the more I read what he wrote about Burning Man, the less I understood his fascination. I mean, this just seemed like one of the more moronic things people have done. So they go out into the desert, and they have this big pagan fest, and then the best thing you can say about it is that when they're done, they try not to leave a single trace that they'd ever been there. That's the best thing you can say about it. What goes on in between those two? Can't think of anything positive, other than, okay, people had fun.
I can think of I can think of something positive.
Go ahead.
Yeah, a small group of Christians put up a tent called the Camp of the Unknown God, and for that week interact with these people, have conversations.
So that was in spite of their agenda. Yeah,
that's right.
That was kind of like
they gave us a platform, or opened up the platform.
So maybe this is a way to tie in re-enchantment with Christian missions.
Yes,
because they really are like the Athenians, aren't they? They have this unknown God. Like, we have an unknown webcast, which maybe someday people will hear about it, long after we're dead, of course. but in any case, So, okay, can you? So let's put some meat on the bones of re-enchantment, and you bring up an excellent point. It gave you the fact that they're gravitating to it, gave you a chance to say something to them that comes from the Bible. But what are they being?
Absolutely.
How can we sum up what they're being drawn to? What is attracting them?
Well, there's a couple of things. Number one, you have to understand there's really three types of people who go to Burning Man. The first are those who are there just to party. I mean, it is a spectacle. It really is a spectacle. There's nothing else like it in terms of seeing art, seeing lights, seeing sounds. It is a absolute sensory overload for a full week. There's no question about that. So there are people going for the party. They're going just to celebrate. I talked to a computer programmer at last year's burn, and he was telling me how stressed his life was and how this was the only event where he could come and basically unwind and not have to worry about anything.
So you sound like you're a veteran. You go last year's burn. That sounds like
well, it was. Yeah, it is. It is.
Bernie Sanders.
Yeah. Well, it does have its own culture. It has its own culture. It has its own language. It has it has its own rules, so to speak. The other type of people who go are those who are spiritually seeking. We've run into people who are there searching for something. We ran into part of my team in 2018 ran into a young girl who was at the temple, and she was crying, and one of our guys came up alongside, talked to her for a while. Turned out that she was a Christian in the sense that she goes to church, she believed the Bible, all and on and on. We would recognize her as being a Christian, but she'd more or less lost her way for the last 5 years or so, and was now looking for something, searching for some kind of meaning. And the guy on our team spent time in prayer with her, encouraged her to go back into the Word, and that she wasn't going to find it here at the burn. So there are people who are spiritually seeking. You do see that. I've had a number of great conversations with people who are either occultists or who are just there to try to find out, where can they find meaning? Where do they find some sense of community? That's all part of it.
In a way, it's kind of like the searchers version of the Parliament of World's Religions.
Yep.
It's like the flip
and all
side.
kinds of religions are represented.
Okay.
You see down the street where we were, we had an esoteric camp, guy talking on magic and doing lectures on occult philosophy. Just across from him was a big Buddhist camp. I think I counted 3 small shrines to Ganesha, the Hindu deity, at different times. And so you're going to run into all kinds of things. It's really like the Parliament of World Religions, except with a lot of dust. And they burn things.
How many people you're out there in the desert? How many people have a horse with no name when you? None of them. Okay.
Well, that would be branding, and you're not supposed to commodify anything.
I forget. This actually has rules. This has rules. Yeah.
And then the third type of people, the third kinds of individuals who go are those who are social change agents, the ones who are already making the world and reshaping the world in different ways. So I would go to workshops on sustainable development goals for the United Nations. Last year we had one of the former chief economists for the World Bank touring the city with the express intent of trying to understand how that could fit with some of the concepts he was working with at the World Bank. 2019, we had 52 U.S. mayors touring the city, looking to learn principles and gain ideas to bring back to their own communities. We had 4 congressmen touring. This is not a bunch of hippies in the desert. I mean, people think like that, but I haven't met a single hippie there. I'm actually kind of disappointed.
And you're looking at a group of Ron, to answer your question, maybe 80,000 people.
Yeah.
So I keep thinking I want to go, and I really do want to go. The problem is I like my comfort level, and somehow camping with 80,000 of my closest friends is just not my idea of a good time.
In
alkali dust with 105
degrees. In alkali
heat.
dust at 105 degrees, exactly.
Well, it sounds like I don't know. I don't know if this is a fair breakdown, but it sounds like you have like 1/3 seekers, 1/3, or let's not say it's a third in terms of statistics, but one portion seekers, one portion people with something.
Partiers.
Well, okay, I was going to get to that. Partiers. One portion was something to sell or some worldview to promote. Let's be kinder than that. And then the partiers, which means this sounds like it was created. The fact that you said I haven't met a single hippie and I'm disappointed. It sounds more like, I mean, I would be too, because because hippies at least were looking for the age of Aquarius or something, right?
Right.
They were definitely on the cutting edge of the re-enchantment thing.
Hmm.
So, but you're finding the partiers, and that reminds me more of the '70s, where we gave up on meaning. You know, it was like where I just want to rock and roll all night and party every day, and that so you disco and all that kind of stuff. So is that a fair breakdown of?
Yeah, I would say that it mixes. People who are coming for the party, there's people also coming for the party who are spiritually seeking. You've got people who are coming for the party who at the same time have big agendas.
Okay.
One of the workshops we attended had some of the leaders from the cryptocurrency community, from
Really?
work. Oh yeah, a lot of cryptocurrency, a lot.
To promote cryptocurrency?
To network,
Okay.
to work through ideas, to talk about it. I was at a workshop in 2018 on cryptocurrency, psychedelics, and spirituality, where we had one of the leading guys, one of the leading lights of the cryptocurrency community. He had just come back from, I believe it was like an ayahuasca trip for 4 days, had come to Burning Man, and then imparted to a group of about 30 to 50 tech gurus in one of the in his big workshop on what he basically viewed as being the new building blocks of civilization. And now, keep in mind, Ron and Don, he broke this down in the space of about 2 hours. But he basically said that we need 4 new building blocks for civilization. First, we need to be spiritually enchanted. That means a new spirituality based on psychedelics, on shamanism, on paganism, the divine feminine. Out with the Judeo-Christian worldview, in with wholeness and oneness. The second building block is we need some type of new social ethic, some new social ethos. And that's what's happening at Burning Man. That's what's taking place. It's being tested and played with in the live. It's literally a sandbox to play with new relationships. A lot of workshops in polyamory, a lot of discussions in what new morality and new ethics looks like in this kind of a world. And then he just said we need a cryptocurrency or some type of a digital currency that will reflect our purchasing habits, how that would reflect block 1 and block 2. And that would become our new way of governing, our new method of economic governance. So if you don't through your purchasing power reflect the new spirituality and the new social ethic, you might have a problem buying or selling. He says, now how do we operate? How do we have all of this operate at a global level? Artificial intelligence.
So that was the fourth.
I mean,
there was the fourth one.
That was the 4th block. Yep, AI.
Okay, so when you went to cryptocurrency, my first thought was, wow, the first 2 tend to be more conformity, and then when I think of cryptocurrency or communalism, let's say, and when I think of cryptocurrency, my mind generally goes to individuality. This gives me freedom. I can now avoid international laws on drugs by laundering money in cryptocurrency. But you're saying no, their plan is to turn it against individuality and for more conformity, more communalism.
In his particular worldview, in this one individual, yes, it was the cryptocurrency would be a method or a tool in which to reflect your new global citizenship values.
And your enforcer mechanism would be the artificial intelligence.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know what else could do that. So
I know.
So artificial intelligence would be programmed somehow to keep everybody in this whatever this new spiritual enchantment is. It's like the soma drug of this brave new world. Whatever the social ethic is, they make sure people conform to that. And then if they get out of line, you're going to have problems with your cryptocurrency.
Right.
So
that was the essence. That was the essence of what he broke down in the space of a 2-hour discussion. Very fascinating.
Nothing absolutely bowel-splittingly, mind-numbingly frightening about that, is there?
I walked away. I walked away with my jaw dragging on the ground, but I picked it up
I
later.
mean, are you able to control our bodily functions after hearing that? I don't know.
Right, just momentarily, I want to again post this so that the viewers can make sure to pick this up. This is a very important book, The Game of Gods, The Temple of Man in the Age of Enchantment. It is a sort of a tome. It's not a small book, but
No,
it
it's
is
not small.
but it is very important because you're covering not only where we're at currently, but how we got here. How did it intersect with, impacted by various religious movements, various political themes, all of that kind of stuff sort of is condensed into this book so that people can get a grasp on what's going on. And it's really important to have that.
Well,
it's a big book. It's
and
like 570 pages. So,
yeah. The stuff we're talking about now is in that book.
Yep.
It's addressed. So now, when I hear this, let's get an artificial intelligence going to make sure everything is run the way we want it to be run. My mind immediately went to Francis Schaeffer, and he talked about the technocrats. We're heading toward a society governed by technocrats. And the question is, who is going to, they're going to be the enforcers. Who's going to make sure they're not being tyrannical? Who is going to, they're going to be society's new keepers. Who's going to keep the keepers, so to speak, was his question. Who's going to be in charge of them? And there was no answer. And there still is no answer, because whoever programs that artificial intelligence is really the dictator. You're not going to have, I do not really think, I don't know if you ever watched the movie Colossus, the Forbin Project, where
great film,
where an artificial intelligence is put in charge of our nuclear stockpile, and then it discovers that the Soviets have already created one of their own for the same purpose, and they link up together and they become the super intelligence that decides, guess what, we're going to run the world, because if we let you guys run it, we're going to be obliterated by nuclear bombs along with the human beings. So they literally, this new nascent artificial intelligence becomes like the same idea as in Terminator, what do they call it, Skynet. It takes over basically Skynet stole this idea from Colossus, the Forbin Project. Not that it wasn't already out in a lot of science fiction stories, but in any case, that scenario seems so highly unlikely to me. As I understand computers, you're always going to need somebody to tell the AI what to do. You're always going to need somebody to feed it new instructions. The AI is never going to be able to prevent that from happening, as I understand it.
Okay, now, well, as you get ready for the next commercial, I'd like to weigh in, and then after the commercial, we'll let the expert weigh in. I would say they may reach a point where a person, quote unquote, is no longer required, because some of the big muckety mucks, which Carl can name, are trying to figure out ways to download themselves into the computer.
Yeah. That'll be interesting, won't it?
Yeah. And with that, Ron.
Okay. Well, you want to, because there's all kinds of stuff going on, and it's just so hard to keep up with. Recently, in an emergency meeting at the Toxico Corporation, the project lead, Stu, said these protests are delaying the project and killing our bottom line. The foreman, Larry, said, all this over a few million dead fish. PR spokesperson Pam said, well, yeah, we're the real victims here. Meanwhile, across town, a hedge fund manager consults with his lawyer. I feel so left out of the culture wars, he says. I can't afford to be left behind. But where do I find the right victim status to bring me the professional success that I am looking for? Meanwhile, Phil is meeting with his career counselor, and he says, I've come to the point where I realize I don't have enough intersectionality on my resume. Do you think I should consider gender reassignment surgery to boost my job prospects? Well, you know what? Now there is a solution. for all of these Z. How come we didn't catch that typo earlier, Don? I mean, this is not the first time I've shown this.
I like it. It's a new word. I like it.
These problems. Okay. Well, now there's a solution for these problems. It is the grievance industrial complex, the premier manufacturer and recycler of fine grievance products. It provides grievances customized for your political, economic, and social goals. It works closely with you throughout the design and implementation process, that is, to ensure your satisfaction. It comes with their very own patented moral high ground package, which includes victim status, identity politics tactics, flawless far left ideology, and so much more. And for a limited time, you get the Total Morons Guide to playing the victim card for terrorists. It's even better than the Harry Potter series, says Dr. S.J.W. Jones, professor of applied abstractions at the Department of Ephemeral Studies. Yes, the grievance industrial complex, because things are never bad enough already. So just remember, when you need a fine grievance product to promote your prospects, job advancement, whatever it is you need, that's what you need.
So, Carl, weighing in on, will AIs always need a person in charge? What do you think?
I don't know. I tend to think no.
But they can function autonomously.
But let me tell you what I really think the importance of the real issue here is not so much of what AI will do or what AI can't do. It's not so much what technology will or will not achieve. It's about the worldview change and the worldview shift that we're seeing around us that reflects what people think of this to begin with.
Yeah.
I'm really more concerned about that aspect than anything else. When I taught the course I did at Miller College last week, I had a 2-hour set of lectures on transhumanism, and I told the class, look, there's some amazing things happening, some really cool stuff going on, some really scary things going on. But what I'm far more concerned is how the worldview change reflects the hope people have in this, how they don't have a hope in Jesus Christ anymore. They have a hope in what man can achieve on his own. And that basically was the bottom line. And so I want to make sure people, especially as Christians, we tend to focus on all these things happening, everything that we just talked about, from interfaithism to Burning Man to technology to transhumanism, all of it reflects a worldview. And that's what we have to keep in mind.
And what is a common theme in everything you've said, I think, in this webcast is there is let's call it a Tower of Babel impulse in humanity to bring everything together to create a really, let's call it I'm just going to call it an ungodly unity. Because that's what it really is. It doesn't think of itself as being ungodly. It doesn't necessarily think of itself as being opposed to God. It is just completely ignoring God. It's oblivious to God. It's doing its own thing regardless of anything God says. He doesn't take input from God. It doesn't read the scriptures. It doesn't care what those scriptures says. It believes it has a better idea, like let's build a tower to the heavens, and that will be the grand unifying project for everybody. And they're basically, this is it, what you've just described.
Mueller was the one of the brain trust for starting the Parliament of the World's Religions. Was it Robert Mueller?
Robert Mueller, yeah.
Robert Mueller,
yep.
not the Robert Mueller that did the Trump.
Not of the FBI, no.
Yeah, he was second in charge at the UN, and so he really was looking for a one world government. That's how he thought the UN would operate. But he came to realize that you needed a religion in order to effectively control politics. You needed to wed those together. And that eventually gave birth to the Parliament of World Religions. So there's a connection here that most people are unaware of, and they are influencing governments at a very high level. The Burning Man is doing a similar thing, not only at a high level, but for the average layperson that's going there. You've got 80,000 of them. Many of them are buying into these concepts. So I guess my question, Carl, to you would be, as Christians, what is it that we need to do for those of us who are so conservative we can't turn left even when we're driving? And we're watching our nations. I assume similar things are going on in Canada that are going on here, where suddenly people have no concept of what a male or female actually is. They don't see any reason why we should, protect those who identify as females biologically and actually should not be subjected to those who are biologically males invading their shower rooms and ogling them while they shower together. Um, how do we respond to that?
I'm glad you use the word respond, because that's what we need to do. Respond and not react. I think we need to respond. I don't think, pardon me. I know we need to respond as ambassadors. This is one of the things I brought forward to my class, and I bring this out in my book as well. What does it mean to be an ambassador? First of all, what does an ambassador do? It's interesting. Paul uses the language of metaphor. We get the language of being running the race for Christ, being a soldier for Christ, being a laborer. We get those metaphors. And then he says something quite interesting, that you are an ambassador. That wasn't a metaphor. It was a declaration. You are an ambassador. Well, what does an ambassador do? What are the tasks? I spent some time at a meeting in Chicago at the Chicago Council on Foreign Relations when they brought in the U.S. ambassador to Saudi Arabia many years ago, and the U.S. ambassador broke down what his tasks and duties were. I walked away from that meeting going, "Oh, this helps me wrestle through what it means to be an ambassador." First, an ambassador, you are the legal and official representative. I'm going to put this in Christian terms. You are the official and legal representative of the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Period. There is no higher calling than that. You are literally the official and legal representative. As the ambassador, you know your king's power and you know your king's position. You know his message. You take your own desires, you take your own interests, and you conform that to the image and to the message of your king. Then an ambassador takes the time, and this is what the U.S. ambassador said, he has to take the time to understand the culture that he would be entering. He needed to understand its history. He needed to understand the context. Not that he became them. He wasn't of their world, but he was in their world. And all this so that he could effectively communicate his government's message. Now, we do the same. We're not in the world. We are not of the world, but we are in the world. And so we try to understand the world to some extent so that we can be effective in communicating our king's message. What we need to do is take our call as ambassadors seriously. And I think, no, it's the wrong word. I know that is what we need to do.
So, okay. Yeah, so you basically, you represent the King of Kings, and yet you educate and in order to represent him to them, to the world, you have to understand the world that you're in.
Right.
There's a story about a missionary who, a missionary couple, they went to evangelize a Native American tribe in Canada. I forget the name of this tribe, but they weren't doing too well. They were there for quite a while, and they weren't making much progress, and they're trying to figure out what can we do to make an impact so that they'll listen to us as we present the gospel, they'll take us seriously. Well, the wife became pregnant, and as she was getting ready to deliver the child, they said, you know what we can do? We can honor the chief by naming our son after him, or our child. Well, once he was born, they knew it was going to be a boy. This is before you could, determine gender. So when they had the boy, they named it after the chief, and within like a day or two, they were being expelled from the tribe, because in that tribe, names are personal property. They had stolen. They had committed theft. They were now branded as thieves, and there's no way. Not only did they lose their opportunity to preach the gospel, but they were not even going to be welcome in that tribe anymore. They had to abandon their efforts because they didn't take time. They didn't study the culture adequately enough. And that sounds like a commercial for not being offensive. But you know what? We aren't supposed to have any unnecessary stumbling blocks to the gospel.
The key word being unnecessary.
Unnecessary. There will be necessary ones when we're representing God faithfully, when we're simply declaring the truth of his word. That will be offensive. Those are necessary offenses. But I had another thought, and that is, here we have a guy, you're talking about Mueller at the Parliament of World Religions. And when I think of the Parliament of World Religions, what greater symbol of pluralism can there be? And yet here's a guy who started it all, who doesn't think pluralism is the answer. He thinks a one world religion, he thinks anti-pluralism is the answer. He thinks somehow we've got to find a way to amalgamate all this into one religion, which is really a form of absolutist tyranny, because you're never going to get everybody to agree on this new religion. Everybody's got their own set of orthodoxy, and it sometimes it frequently contradicts the orthodoxies of other groups. So here's a precise illustration, this Mueller fellow, how pluralism has become a Trojan horse for absolutist tyranny, because that's where he's really heading.
Right.
Yeah.
Oneness demands that everything conform into that system.
You shall be assimilated.
Well, it does. And in our current political environment, and I think Carl is exactly right, you cannot divorce your politics from your religious worldview. They are inextricably woven together. And so in our current state, I like the Babylon, or the
Trojan horse?
No, the Tower of Babylon.
Tower of Babel
idea. Yeah, the Tower of Babel idea. Because that's really what we're finding is humans have decided that they truly are the center of the universe, and what they believe is the only thing that actually matters. And if you disagree with their belief, you will be punished in some way, shamed, run out of business, lose your job, whatever it is, because you didn't use the right gender description that the individual chose this morning, or you disagree with the idea that there are 112 genders, you will be summarily not executed, because they haven't achieved that yet, but pretty close.
I'm trying to make enough tweets on Twitter and posts on social media and Facebook and all that, so that no one will ever even think of asking me to host the Academy Awards. That's my number one goal. If they ever decide to reinstate hosts for the Academy Awards, and they ask me, would you be willing to do that? I would say, have you checked my Facebook account? Have you checked my Twitter account? I'm not your guy. Yeah, just I've been trying to send you signals for years now. I'm not your guy.
Well, and one of the questions I get pretty frequently, we're past time, we're going to take a couple more minutes because I do want to touch on this. I have a number of people who email me or contact me and say, how can we change our nation back to where it was? There's this idea that we can somehow recapture the Andy Griffith era, where even though we weren't all Christians, we had a Judeo-Christian morality and view of life. And I have to say, you can't. You can't rewind the clock in that way.
Well, even that, you watch Andy Griffith. I love the show. It's a wonderful show, but I don't really watch it too much. You could watch it for worldview. You can watch any show for worldview, and you could learn a lot. But it's set in the Deep South. I assume North Carolina, because you hear about Raleigh, the state capital. It is a secular show. It's purely secular. They go to church, but you never hear anything about the Christian faith is not presented. And it makes total sense. Here you have a show that's set in North Carolina, but filmed in California. It made perfect sense. If I often wonder, what if that show had been filmed on location with using real people? It would have been a different show.
Well, the point I'm trying to get at, I think, is this, because what I'm going for is we individually will probably not make a change in the culture universally in the United States. We can only individually affect other individuals that we come in
Right.
contact with, who are
Right.
being persuaded through media largely to adopt these other views, whether they're comfortable or not, which to me means we need to then, churches need to train their individuals, the ministry of the churches to train those that are part of their church body to be ambassadors. I like your concept there, Carl, and I agree with it. Out to the individuals they come in contact with in their neighborhoods, their cities, towns that they have direct influence over. Ultimately, culture changes as individuals change. It isn't usually
Yep.
the other way around.
That's right. And there are ways that you can do, I mean, just small things sometimes, and that's really all we can do. I have a friend, he's passed away now. His name was Dr. Adair, and Dr. Adair used to go to used bookstores. Actually, this is how he found me. He would go specifically as a Christian, he would go to the New Age section, and he would just come up to a person and say, "So, do you really believe what you're reading?" And that would be how he would open up a conversation. I was doing some research on the New Age, and that's how he came up to me as I was in the New Age section. But that's what his role as an ambassador was, and he'd open up conversations on worldviews, on religion, on the New Age, just by asking that simple question.
All right, so I want to mention your book again, because we are, as we often do, going over time, but we enjoy doing that. The book is Game of Gods, The Temple of Man in the Age of Enchantment. It is available in paperback and on Kindle. So if you are frugal, I like the word frugal instead of cheap. If you're frugal, you can get it on Kindle.
Have too many books in your house, you know. So.
I have a lot of books. You see, one day, I don't know, Ron may know this, Carl doesn't. I was sitting in my living room one day and I'm going, what am I going to do? I have so many books, I don't even know what to do anymore. And then I realized there's like this foot of space around the top of every room you have that you don't use for anything. And so I put up shelves in every room in my house.
Wow.
Perfect. That's great.
It was a perfect solution. And with that, Ron, do you want to walk us out of here? A little walk?
All right, a jog or well, something like that. Okay, in any case, our resident cult leader profiler is Neil before me. Our wardrobe manager is See How It Fits You. Our culinary services come from Chef Ham and Cheese. Our tinfoil hat provisioner is Just In Case. Our Jehovah's Witnesses coverage comes from Armageddon and Dia Poser. Our Mormon Archives manager is Polly Gummas. Our Liberal Denominations Bureau Chief is Lucy Goosey. Our transgender issues coverage comes from Ben Hur. Our special correspondent for cults based on the Hindenburg disaster and flying turkeys, dehumanity. Our fact-checking supervisor is Oleg Pulling. Our technical assistance comes through Murky Research. Our legal advisors are at the law firm of Dewey, Cheatham and Howe. Our grievance resolution director is Yvonne Pisani. Our Director of Privacy Assurance is wiretapping, and original idea sourcing comes from Drew LeBlanc. The Unknown Webcast is a production of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. in cooperation with Emergency Manicure Productions, who are both solely responsible for this content. And you'll notice I changed the copyright date this week.
I'm glad you did, yes.
That means that the copyright on last week's program is going to expire a year earlier, 70 years from now, however many years these things last. And so, but I think there is a guy on NPR named Just In Case. I wonder if he's related to our Just In Case. I thought that was really interesting.
Maybe you should check on him just in case.
Just in case.
Carl, if you and Ron can hang on for a moment, to everyone else, we're going to say
adios.
See you all next week.
Okay.